Come find out everything you need to know about painting the color gray for beginners and veterans alike.
Spiky bits.
Welcome back, Hobby Maniacs. I'm Rob Bear, and today we're gonna go over the color gray. We have a kind of a new feature for you all today where we break down a lot of the different types of gray paints from Vallejo, Army Painter, and Citadel / Games Workshop. Kind of talk about those for a little minute, give you some of their equivalencies across the board with each other, give you some background, some history of how to use them, show you some real world examples that we have painted ourselves using these paints, and then we're going to lead you on a step-by-step tutorial showing you one of the great color schemes that we've come up with over the years here while we actually paint up some of our DKoK Kriegs. So if you're interested in painting DKoK Krieg from Forge World, well, this might be a great way to both learn a lot about the grays, from the white gray to the dingy blue grays that are out there on the market, and kind of pick up some of that hobby knowledge to put in your hobby toolbox on how to paint grays. I think this type of feature here is great for both veterans and beginners alike, because we kind of go through a little bit of color theory and then show you some real world step-by-step examples on how to actually paint it, both with the airbrush and also with the brushes themselves. So sit on back, take it all in, and let us know what you think in the comments at the end. So for the most part, there's a lot of gray paint out there on the market. Today we're just going to talk about some of the stuff that we use as wargamers, from white grays and blue grays. And every brand out there, from Army Painter to Vallejo to also Games Workshop, has their little range of grays and what to use them on and different things. And today we're going to take a look at all the different ranges and then do a quick tutorial on one particular way to bring out just your basic grays on a model. Very, very simple stuff. But it is grays and white, and sometimes, you know, how to highlight black can be a little difficult for people. So we're going to kind of hit both the edges there, but talk more in the center about gray today. So first off, Army Painter has their grays. Now these are their blue grays here, and their neutral gray, their uniform gray. So you've got a wolf gray and a gorgon hide that are great together, and they're very similar to the wolf grays from both Vallejo and Games Workshop. They also have their white grays, which are stone golem and ash gray. I love both of these. Use these a lot on things that you've probably seen here on the channel. We're going to talk more about those here in a second. Then you've got the Vallejos. Now, it doesn't matter if it's game or air or regular game color. They're both the same, Stonewall Gray and Cold Gray. And these actually are comparable to the old Cold Gray or Codex Gray and Fortress Gray from Games Workshop, their previous Citadel line. I think that was previous to, what, 2011 or something like that. But that's those right here. And then you've got your neutral gray, your gray, which is also a US gray. Sometimes they change their names from time to time. And then you've got your blue grays, which are somber gray and wolf gray. Again, if you're comparing it to the old GW colors, that's somber or shadow gray, and I think it was Space Wolf Gray. I forget exactly, but that was the highlight color there, previous to 2011. Currently for Citadel, they have, for their white grays, they have ULTHUAN and CELESTRA. Now these are more of the brighter colors. They have like a Dawnstone, and I think it's Dawnstone and other one, Eshin. But we're not going to really talk about those because these are the ones that I think pop the most, and they're more comparable when you're trying to work on things. And then their neutral gray, which is Mechanicus standard gray right there. I don't have the GW blue grays because at this point, once you have all these paints, you kind of need to stop buying the Games Workshop paints because they're all very similar. So similar it doesn't even matter. But just know that I think it's RUSS gray, and I'm looking for it on my paint chart here. RUSS gray and FENRSIAN gray are Games Workshop's blue grays. And when you're about to see here in a second why exactly that is. So now that we have some ideas about the different color ranges available for gray that most people use for wargaming from the different manufacturers, let's talk about how to start out your project working up from gray. So a great way to start every project is just a solid neutral primer. If you know you're doing grim dark, or you know you're doing something that you want to be inherently dark, using a black primer is perfect. And you can use the Citadel primer's fine. A lot of folks feel like it's overpriced, and they prefer something from maybe Walmart or something like that. I personally prefer the Army Painter matte black because you can color match the black to anything you prime. But if you're going to be doing grays, another great choice is also Army Painter, using the Uniform Gray or the Wolf Gray, depending on what exactly you're going to be doing for your project. And each of these has a use. You could even use a white primer in order to start your project as well, if you want something to be a little bit on the lighter side. And I'll show you some examples of that as well as we start talking about the pros and cons of each individual paint company's kind of whole range. So first off, we have the Army Painter dropper bottles. And I love these because they're 100% color match with the primer that you might use that we just showed you right there. So if you primer it with this color and then you use this dropper bottle for touch-ups, it's gonna match 100%. That's huge. The price point on these is great. They're $2.99 a bottle, I believe, and most of the primers are, the white and the black are $10, and I think the colored ones are anywhere from $12 to $15, depending on which one you use. Army Painter isn't as widely available as, you know, say Vallejo or Games Workshop, because a lot of stores don't carry it. But that's something to be aware of. Another neat feature about Army Painter is that they're going to come a little watery because they put extra matte medium in here to try to help keep them from drying out on the racks. Unlike some other companies, they, you know, try to do everybody a solid in that regard. So before you buy, after you buy, but before you shape a new Army Painter paint, try to drain out as much of that matte medium out of the top as possible, because it will cause issues for you later. Now, we're not going to use any of the Army Painter paints in this tutorial, but the Airbrush Gray, I mix everything with a little bit of Vallejo Flow Improver in the airbrush, and it usually paints just fine. This snow speeder right here, or air speeder, whatever you want to call it, for Star Wars Legions, we did a base coat of this ash gray here because there is no ash gray primer, and I wanted a lighter color, just like to be true to the movie. Now, we haven't detailed it out yet, but we're getting there. We're going to do that live on stream here eventually. So I airbrushed this straight out of the bottle all over it, and then we gave it a really washed down glaze, which is probably called a filter depending on who you ask, to tighten this up. And then we just went back and edged it a little bit. So this kind of gives you an idea of the lightest, and then we went in with a little bit of the Uniform Gray and hit it with those darker blocks right there. So this is a good example of what you can do with the Army Painter matte paints right here if you have them. And then we come to Vallejo. Vallejo's a great paint. It's super versatile. You can do a lot with these paints. I think they run about $4 a bottle, but they're pretty readily available at any store for the most part. Some stores don't carry the air, some stores carry the game color. Either way, like I said, the colors are pretty much the same as far as that goes. These two colors are what we're going to primarily use for our tutorial today once we get to that part, but I wanted to talk about the different grays that are available out there because there's so many. It's so easy to use, it's kind of ridiculous. Obviously, this is airbrush ready. If you have the game color versions of it, well, then, you know, you're going to have to use it out of the pot. Vallejo's good stuff. Like I said, here's some of the completed models that we have done. Right here, here's a mortar team where we've used a couple of different and this is actually what the tutorial is going to be on today. We've used a couple of different of the grays. The white grays here for the trench coats of the DKoK Krieg, and then the blue grays and some black in here for their bases. That's the Sombre Gray and the Wolf Gray right there. So this is kind of an idea of what you can do with two different tones of gray with a little bit of accents and metal highlights and such like that right there. You can also do a lot more, like whole vehicles and such, with the whiter grays that we showed you earlier, the Stonewall and the Cold Gray, something like this. If you mix in a little bit of the base gray here, which is very similar to the Uniform Gray or the Mechanicus Standard Gray from Games Workshop, just to make a little bit more contrast to the vehicles and kind of break up the pattern. That's what we did for these DKoK tanks and these DKoK vehicles here. You could also use a little bit of black, but not go too heavy on it, which you can see here. There's almost like 3 tones in here. You've got your grays, and you've got your light, darker gray, and then it goes down into a black in the corners right there. And then we come to Games Workshop colors, which for the most part are probably the most readily available in the world, because everybody seems to be close to a Games Workshop store, and we all know they stock their own paint. So there's that. I think these retail for like $4.25 these days, give or take. Some of the more expensive like metals might go for more, I forget. And then of course the super jumbo pots of wash go for like $8, give or take. So they can be a little bit more pricier. However, definitely readily available. Now this particular combination here is the ones that pop a little bit more, I feel like, than the other ones that we showed you. So there is, you know, the development and everything that Games Workshop puts into this stuff that can really make things work. Now this Space Marine, or this Space Wolf here, was painted using the GW blue grays, the RUSS and the FENRSIAN, over a white primer or a white base coat to start with. So that's a little cheater way you can get brighter looking paints from, you know, already existing brighter palettes right here. So depending on how you want to do it, like we could have done this DKoK over a white primer, but we went ahead and used the normal uniform gray, and it would have been brighter, but I don't feel like that was the right case. But when you're working with stuff like snow and things like that, maybe you want a brighter miniature, and that is an option for you right there as well. So now that we've showed you all the different ranges of grays for the main manufacturers that you're probably going to find on the shelf at your local game store, we're going to show you how to actually paint gray using the Vallejo, Air, or just regular, it doesn't matter, game color, they're all pretty much the same to me, and work those up and show you how to do it both with an airbrush and with a normal brush. So we have 2 DKoK of Kriegsmen's right here that we primered with the Army Painter Uniform Gray, just because it's a nice solid gray base, and I have a bunch of cans of it because it's great to use. And then we already took the liberty and hit this one here on the right, top down, with a little bit of a highlight color, the Stonewall Gray from Vallejo Game Air. For the most part, this matches up to the cold gray, so I'm not worried about that. I'm not worried about it not being the same color or anything like that. A lot of these colors are inherently the same, which you will come to find out. So this is just an idea of what you can do with or without an airbrush. The only part of this whole tutorial that we're going to do with an airbrush that we need the airbrush for, I actually don't need the airbrush, but just to show you, was that pre-shade right there, and maybe a little bit of dirt around their the bottom of their military blouse right here. So we're just going to grab and do a little quick dry brush over this trench coat, this gray coat, so to speak. So we're going to grab a little bit of a highlight color, which is going to be Stonewall Gray. This is pretty much where we're working right here. Cold gray and Stonewall Gray today. Get a little bit on our nice big poofy brush, and then grab our little paper towel. Make sure we get the majority of the paint off here. How easy it is to dry brush. I'm going to show you. Woo, we got some underneath. It's okay. Just how easy it is to produce a similar effect if you're not. Now, if you're using a tank or you're doing a bunch of surface area or something like that, yeah, you're probably going to want to maybe invest in an airbrush or something like that. But when you're doing just a bunch of dudes like this in assembly line fashion, you can use the good old-fashioned dry brush technique, and it'll look very similar, if not the same, to what you can achieve just doing a little bit of top-down highlight. So the bristles, the paint on the very ends of the bristles here are going to get picked up by the edges, and just like that, it should be very similar to what we have on the right, which you can see on the left pretty much looks like the guy on the right now, with a minimal amount of effort. Now, if you're doing 40 of these guys, yeah, dry brush might help out a lot. But if you just got one guy to do, you might not want to fire up your airbrush just for that right there. So that's step one in the books. We've got some contrast already forming. Now we're gonna go in and start creating some of the layer work that we need to. But first, we're gonna hit this with a wash. Okay, so fast forward a little bit here, and we've actually blocked in all of our detail work here, because if we're gonna wash it, we might as well maximize our time here. So we're gonna grab the one, and I actually can't even tell them apart at this point, which one was the dry brush and which one was the airbrush. That is a good question. I can't even tell. Oh, I guess it's the one. I guess it's this one. You can see it from the top. That actually makes sense. But we will go ahead and grab the one that isn't, just to give you a better idea of how that works. So now we're going to do our wash. When it comes to washes, we're going to use the Nuln Oil gloss. Now, there's two different versions. There's the regular Nuln Oil. This is sold in the same size, bigger size bottle. Now, currently, the gloss has a little bit of, I guess, flow improver, or if you want to call it tension breaker, so that it spreads out a little bit more on the miniatures. So we're going to throw a little bit of this into our Buster palette right here, which is just a water bottle lid, and I would say enough for a few of these guys right here. So there we go. That's a decent amount, probably a little too much. So since we're just doing two guys, we'll get about that much. Then we're gonna use what I like to call our hobby ketchup. I use it in everything from keeping the paint workable on my palettes to actually building my washes and stuff out of these days. This stuff is great. Comes in this big, ginormous bottle. It's easy to use. We're gonna add about 3 parts of this to the 1 part that's in here, so a whole lot. Boom. Grab our Buster brush over here, mix it all up. This is what I use to airbrush with and mix my paints. Should, with any luck, get a nice thin wash that isn't too thin. Here's how we check that. So we're gonna grab just a little paint palette right here, grab a little bit out, test it. That's the opaqueness. So that's probably a little too opaque. Probably a little too not opaque enough. Well, I don't know. Let's see. I think that might be. We'll add a little bit more. Sometimes getting your wash right, it's a little tricksy. But with a little, and if you're doing a whole army's worth, you probably just want to mix up a separate pot of this, just to this, just so we don't get, just so you can have the consistency across the whole thing. You can buy a couple of, you know, dropper bottles or something like that, fill them up, have all the same consistency, so that way you don't ruin anything, so to speak. That's a little bit more darker. I feel like that's a good wheelhouse for us. So we just added a little bit more, a dab of a little bit more in, and now we're ready to roll. Now that that's all set up, we are ready to roll on our wash. So we're gonna grab I like this little flat chisel brush from Army Painter for doing single miniatures right here. It's just the right size to handle pretty much everything I want to do. Get in here. Start at the top, work our way down, let gravity do its trick. Just let it flow into all the areas it needs to. It is going to be a little bit super thin because remember we used the gloss and we also added in a little bit of flow improver. So take it slow, work your way down, make sure you're brushing it on all the areas of your gray. Now in this instance I'm getting it all over everything, which is okay because that was the whole point. That's why we base coated it earlier. But we're just going to work it through and then slowly go back and dab up any spots where it started to collect. Now, once you've let it dry, you're going to get a nice even coat over this, making sure that you got all your blotches and everything afterwards. It's going to look a little shiny. That's to be expected. Once you hit it with some dull coat at the end of the project, it'll all come back together. Looks like we got a little bit of wet spots in and the far cracks right there, which is no big deal because we're going to be very careful for the next step, which is layering. So first you highlight, or first you give the overlights and everything like that, like we showed, whether you want to use the airbrush or just a dry brush. Then we hit it with the wash to bring it back down, and now we're going to go in and layer it back. So now everything's got a nice good look to it. So with that, we are going to use the cold gray, which is the base color. You're probably like, wait, why are we going back to base color? This doesn't make any sense. Because there's a method to our madness. We need to leave one more spot to bring up the layers a little bit, because even though we got down in the cracks, we're just going to bring it back a little bit, and there will be lots of room for highlights here. So we're just going to go in and hyper highlight with our cold gray and just get all the raised edges right there like we needed to. And on these flat areas right here, you just want to make sure that thin down your paints enough where it'll just go right over top of it and there'll be no streaking. If you're seeing streaks, your paint is not moist enough to go over all of this. Now, a good trick for this is actually to use the airbrush version of the paint to brush on, which we're doing right here. So if you got these large flat areas like the underside of the cape and such like that, what you just need to do is just have no fear, get in there. Your consistency is good enough because it's airbrush paint, it's already pre-thinned, and we're just gonna nug it out, and you'll see right in front of your eyes as it starts to dry, like that is dried, it's shaded. You basically got shaded by the stuff underneath it. The same with in here. It may look like, hey, this brush isn't big enough. Be doing that as you're going. I'm trying to get this here so you can see it, but once it starts to stick, it'll dry out and look just right. Time for a second layer. We are going to use the highlight color, which is Stonewall Gray. Again, the air paint. We're not going to go heavy. We're not going to get crazy with it. All we're going to do is a lot of hyper edging, hyper highlights, edge highlighting, whatever you want to call it, and just go along the straight edges, the stuff like that. That's all noticeable in here. Maybe some of these folds, I just don't want to get too crazy with it. Anything that's got a pronounced kind of straight edge to it is doable, but we don't want to overdo it. You probably don't want to get on any of those flat areas. It'll start looking a little rough. We'll just go through and do it like that. So after a few minutes of hyper highlighting all those edges, you get this result here, a very cool grim darky looking gray that's done a little bit differently, because like I said, we highlighted it, then we brought it down with a wash, then we brought it up with 2 layer highlights. I don't recommend doing this for all your rank and file troopers, but I think for the most part, if you do your officers and your sergeants and stuff like this, it's worth doing. For the most part, you could probably stop for line guys after you do the wash, maybe thin it down a little bit more and do the wash with the airbrush. It would probably look fantastic. But for this is a great idea on how to get some really good looking cold grays using the Stonewall and cold gray from Vallejo. Now, we're going to spend a few minutes and finish up the rest of this model and show you what the finished product is going to look like, and then recap everything and show you all the colors we used on the models if you do want to paint or are curious about how we painted these Deathcore Kriegsmen. A little bit of time later, we have the finished product here. There he is right there. He's putting the wheel on the mortar to launch there, believe it or not. Still got to matte coat it and put some tufts onto it. You always want to matte coat before you put the tufts on so the tufts don't look frosted. But for the most part, this model's done and I'm super happy with it. Now, to get it to this point with all the browns and everything, we'll give you the recipe so you can do that yourself to make your own Death Cores of Krieg. So first off, you already know the 2 main colors here, along with the uniform gray spray from Army Painter. That's what the whole project started out as. You know what we washed it in, the gloss, not the basic Nuln Oil. Then we came back and actually did all the straps in a darker Nuln Oil, believe it or not. So straight Nuln Oil out of the pot for the belts, the straps, And then straight Agrax, which is another great color from Games Workshop. That's right. Agrax over the helmets to get that brown glow. Again, it's going to be a little shiny. We haven't matte coated it yet. And also all of the brown. So the boots, the straps, and the face right there, we just hit with straight Agrax right out of the pot right here. Then from there, we did fire up the airbrush and hit it with a little Harvest Brown before we based it from the airbrush. You could do this as a very light dry brush if you wanted to. Harvest Brown is a great color. It's a very yellowy orange brown that just really pops very well with these colors here. So I love it. It works really great with a lot of things. Even if you're just doing, you know, some weapons, it looks great with little black cut back into it and everything for simulated dirt. So there it is. That's everything. And then of course down here, as you could guess, that is the somber gray and the wolf gray with a little black mixed in to kind of cut it back on the somber side right there, using the airbrush of course. But again, you can simulate this with a dry brush. It'll take you a little bit more time, but the texture is there and you can definitely make it work with a little bit more time, like I said. So that is our guide, a beginner's guide, so to speak, to grays, and also some ideas on how to paint and layer your basic white gray from the bottom up in a little bit of a reverse order from what traditionally folks say to do. So I like that technique. It works great for the models I've done, the rank and file models, like as you can see right here, the mortar team. And then of course, like I said, you can always spend more time on things like a commissar. You know, you could go in and hyper highlight the crap. You can see I did a lot more line work in here all the way around the cloak and everything like that. It's all about how much time versus return you want when you're doing 100 Death Corps. Maybe just spend the time on the 10 officers to really take them to the next level right there. So, see what I did there. All right, well, that's it. We're gonna get out of here. Thanks for watching this video. Make sure to work out those hobby muscles, hit that subscribe button, and turn on notifications so you can be the very first to like and comment on these posts.
Deleted scenes, bonus content, and all the interviews and post-game wrap-up videos can be located in the Hall of Veterans on thelongwar.net. Visit thelongwar.net today and try a week completely free with no strings attached. That's not all. Thelongwar.net is also your hobby resource for exclusive early access with an ad-free experience to all your favorite videos. Members of the Hall of Veterans gain early exclusive access to multiple hobby videos.